I do want to go ahead and introduce Dr. Gaoue. He is an associate professor in the University of Tennessee's Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. I'm really excited for his talk today. It's a really unique topic that we really haven't heard anything adjacent to. His research integrates population ecology and ethnobiology and study plant-human interactions in a changing world, and basically looking at how this informs the conservation of biodiversity and sustainable use of ecosystem services. So no doubt that this will be a really interesting lecture from him. We are recording and we'll post this up on our website just like we do with most of our seminars. And so feel free to share it more broadly after we're all finished. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Dr. Gaoue.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for joining online for this discussion on ethnobiological analysis of how humans select plant for medicine. To start, I'd like to give an overview of the type of research that we do in my lab, and use that to actually make the point that I'm probably the imperfect messenger here for this great message, because ethnobiology represent about 20 to 30% of my research effort. Most of the research we do in my lab is around plant-human interactions, and tend to cover two major research questions. The first one, more ecological. I was trained as a population ecologist and with interest in conservation biology. So we tend to focus more on how ecological systems respond to perturbation from human origin mainly. So how humans affect population dynamic and species coexistence. And that tend to kind of represent about 80%, sometime a little less of my research effort. And the second question is around how plant response to previous interaction with human tend to shape future interactions, and how people use the ecological knowledge of the environment to actually develop management strategies, adaptive management strategies in particular. But ultimately, the goal of all of this research is to be able to develop conservation and sustainable use strategies. And but for today, I'm going to be talking more about the ethnobiological side. And the global motivation for this talk is about the importance of medicinal plants globally in the world, being developed or developing worlds. Out of the around 300,000 plants known or described, about 10% of it is used for medicine. And that is accounting for the fact that most of these 300,000 plants are in remote location, out of reach for most local people. They are in protected areas that are out of reach for most local people, or for some other reason. But this represent up to 83 billion market. I mean, US dollar, showing you the value of this sector. But clearly, not every single medicinal plant is created equal. Some family tend to actually have more medicinal plant than others. And in this discussion, I'll go back to this as a way of actually investigating or understanding how humans tend to select plant for medicine. I propose three different axes for this talk. First, I'll give a brief introduction of ethnobiology and ethnomedicine and the struggle with theory and theoretical thinking over the years. And then I would talk about the theoretical basis for human plant selection for medicine using 10 postulate that I, put together. It's debatable, but these are some of the postulates that are frequently discussed in ethnobiology. And then at the end, I'll try to reconcile ethnobiology with the sister discipline, particularly cultural ecology, cultural evolution, evolutionary anthropology, social psychology, paleoevolution, and ecological anthropology, because it is my understanding that folks with interests or expertise in those disciplines are part of this group, but there have been decades-long parallel evolution of this discipline and less cross disciplinary discussion, particularly with ethnobiology. And I think this is long overdue to kind of reconcile these discipline dealing with the same topic or trying to understand or ask the same questions. So ethnobotany is a study of the direct being ecological, evolutionary, or symbolic interactions between human and plants. And when you add animal to this mix, it becomes ethnobiology, which is broader. And ethnobiology tend to be classified in two different sub discipline. First, cognitive ethnobiology or ethnobotany, and then every time I say ethnobotany, you could actually put ethnobiology in there because it is basically the same, research ideas, method, and concept that I use both in ethnobotany and ethnobiology, which is broader. So you have cognitive ethnobiology that tend to be interested in how human view and classify the environment, being how they classify soil, how they name plants, how they classify habitat, tend to follow specific rules that are cross-cultural, so consistent across different culture and different language system. And the second is it's called economic ethnobotany or economic ethnobiology, more interested in how humans use plant. So how humans select plant for use, for their livelihood, has captured most of the interests of ethnobiology. It's lopsided. Most of the work tend to be on this topic. Now, ethnobiology has struggled over the years with its relationship to theory, and there have been several decades of internal discussion within ethnobiology about the lack of unifying theory, or actually theories in plural, with critics actually, self-critics actually observing an overemphasis on data compilation and the scarcity of hypothesis testing in ethnobiology in general. And in addition, there's the discussion of a lack of methodological rigor and infrequent unwillingness to actually test hypotheses in ethnobiology. Oliver Phillip and Al Gentry actually wrote a paper in the early 1990s, actually emphasizing this point, which was widely accepted. I mean, everyone agreed that connection to theory or theory based research in ethnobiology is long overdue and would help connect the discipline to other sister disciplines. Gary Martin, who wrote a lot of books, several books on ethnobotany, ethnobiology, later on, came back to this same idea, that is in 2007. So after several decades, observing that the same problem persists and, suggesting that research should be guided by theory and hypothesis, and that the ability of the discipline to contribute to human welfare and the scientific discovery is directly related to formulation of general principle that can only be done by using theory inspired and hypothesis-driven, ethnobiological research. Brad Bennett, a professor at Florida International Universities, remarked that most students tend to focus on their study system when they're asked to describe their research, often saying, I want to study this group of plant, or I want to study this indigenous community in this area, but suggesting that research should be more question-driven and theoretically motivated for these research to be able to gain traction cross-disciplinary and facilitate interdisciplinary discussion. However, all of these recent discussion on the need for theory face a great obstacle, which is confusing the need of theory with the need of quantification and the search of increasing the methodological rigor in ethnobiology. So an era of quantitative ethnobotany and ethnobiology was born, past the 1900s, and a flurry of ethnobiological indices has been created as a way of trying to make ethnobiology stronger. Bruce Hoffman and Tim Gallagher, a student at the time at University of Hawaii at Manoa, put together these papers synthesizing most of the indices that has been created in ethnobiology. And with one of my graduate students at the time, when I was at University of Hawaii at Manoa, Michael Ko, we actually review most of these indices, about 30 of them, and actually show that most of these indices tend to be strongly correlated. So basically tend to be capturing the same reality, even though they are presented as separate indices. And in this paper, we're calling for dropping out these overemphasis on ethnobiological indices and testing hypotheses more directly using, state-of-the-art statistical method that we know of. Now, thanks to persistent effort by Ulysses Albuquerque from University of University of Pernambuco in Brazil, the discussion on the need of theory and the importance of theory in ethnobiology was kept alive. Writing several important papers on the question, and also remarking that ethnobiology really does not lack theory. But most of the theory that motivates or inspire ethnobiological research tend to be borrowed from other disciplines, including ecology, chemical ecology, social psychology, and anthropology. But the way these work are presented tend to omit that theoretical motivation and theoretical basis. So in my previous position at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, in 2017 with my graduate student at the time, and an anthropological colleague, Heather Macmillan, we put together this paper reviewing or synthesizing the major hypothesis and major theory in ethnobotany. And that was followed 5 years later by another paper with my old graduate student and current grad student at the time when I started at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, with other colleagues from South Africa. We revisited that question and proposed advanced statistical modeling technique that can be used to test these important, interesting theory and hypothesis that we suggested in the 2017 paper. And the postulate was simple, that over these two papers, our thinking is that by providing a synthesis that clearly identify the theories and major hypotheses in ethnobiology on how humans select plant for medicine, and at the same time, providing the statistical method to test these hypotheses, we'll be able to encourage theory-inspired, hypothesis-driven ethnobiology and answer the call that has been launched about 5 decades ago by Henry Ford. Well, that has led to a lot of discussion around this question. Recently, a debate in Journal of Ethnobiology and Ethnomedicine on the need for theory-inspired, hypothesis-driven ethnobiology, or a folk biology, or the classical ethnobiology approach is still important. Now, I would present the 10 different postulates around which medicinal plant selection by human is often discussed in ethnobiology. And in the first one, propose that human randomly select the plant species that are the most abundant in the environment as a way of minimizing the cost of acquiring medicine while maximizing the benefit of treatment. And this can be thought of as an overshoot of the optimal foraging theory, where it is expected that with increasing availability of a given plant species, that species tend to be overrepresented in ethnopharmacopoeia, suggesting that the selection of the plant for medicinal use first happened not because they have been pinpointed, but because they were the one available there to be used. There have been several tests of this hypothesis, but a recent 2016 meta-analysis conducted by Elisa Albuquerque's group suggests that there is support for such a postulate demonstrating that there is this positive, medium or mild correlation between species availability and the probability of use by local people, but focusing more on woody species. The second postulate, suggests that it's not just the availability of the plant that, predicts the likelihood of human selecting these plant for medicinal use, but it is the apparency of the plant that are conspicuous, that are more visible, that are more apparent, that are probably more available over the years, are the one that would tend to be selected by a human for medicine. And that apparency hypothesis is actually inspired by chemical ecological work done by Finney and Coates in the 70s, where they were more interested in how insects actually select, plant for herbivory, and that has been readapted here in the context of ethnobiology. And it is an hypothesis that have been tested, with the research actually showing that in some cases, this is not always true. And this in this paper, the entire ethnopharmacopoeia was tested, showing that herb, tend to be use more than trees. Trees expected to be more conspicuous, more apparent. Um, but the third postulate suggests that instead of apparency or availability actually driving human plant selection, is rather the versatility of the plant itself that is predicts the selection by human, because it is thought that human first selects most plants for food or other uses or other purposes, and later discover the medicinal value and then use them as food medicine and ultimately as medicine. So postulate was motivated by work, Brad Bennett and Guillaume Prince work, observing that for some community, particularly the Shua people in Nolan, Ecuador, that plant like citrus or ginger or sugar cane or um, you know other plant that are used for food also have medicinal value and are used for medicine. And if you push this further in most urban medicine tend to actually be dominated by these food medicine as a way of actually optimizing space, where instead of having separate space or for food and medicine, being able to combine these two uses in the same species would maximize, optimize space. So the same goes with ornamental plants that are also used for medicine, playing dual role in this case. But the ecological apparency hypothesis, which dominated the discussion in the 70s in chemical ecology, was increasingly tested in the 80s. And there was a strong rebuttal by work by Saul Chapins and Liz Colley from Utah University, showing that it's not necessarily the apparency of the plants that drive herbivory, but is rather the growth rate of the plant that affects how likely a given plant would suffer herbivory or not, with the idea that plants tend to invest more in secondary chemistry, with generation time. So long-lived species would tend to invest more in constitutive secondary chemistry, and as a result, would be strongly defended because they can't tolerate herbivory given their slow growth. But for a fast growth species that tend to be short-lived, the ability of reconstituting biomass lost through herbivory will lead to greater tolerance of herbivory and less production of constitutive defense. And based on that prediction, in ethnobiology, it's suspected that woody species would tend to be used for medicine more than short-lived species or herbaceous species. And along the same line, given that growth rate tend to be slow in most in poor resource a poor environment compared to resource-rich environment, it is expected that medicinal plant will be found more in these poor environment or disturbed environment like secondary growth forests rather than primary forests, for example. Now, the fifth postulate suggests that the plant are not just disproportionately um, selected by human based on their availability, their appearance, or their location, but that human deliberately try to diversify the botanical available for the treatment of disease, and particularly of new disease that tend to lead to the introduction of weed or alien species in ethnopharmacopoeia. And that was motivated by this work by Rick Stepp and that moment showing that in the Maya medicinal flora 35% of the medicinal flora is weed, so alien species, and the same study in North American medicinal flora show nearly a quarter of the medicinal flora is represented by weed or alien. And in Hawaii, over the years, there have been an increasing representation of uh, 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 alien, plant species in ethnopharmacopoeia in Hawaii, showing a greater incorporation of new species that are previously new to human into their medical system out of necessity, particularly to treat a new disease or disease that emerge later in the system. And support for this hypothesis also come from Brazil, where the study by Elisa Bequeke's group show more use of exotic or alien species, and try to pinpoint the chemical basis for such use, showing that these alien species tend to be more terpene rich. That might explain their use for some specific illnesses. With a graduate student at the time at University of Hawaii, we tested this hypothesis using the Ecuador's flora, which is around 16,000 species, demonstrating that introduced species tend to be more frequently used than not. Now that takes us to the sixth postulate that asks the question of the role of plant family in driving medicinal plant selection by human. An idea developed by Dan Moment, was at University of Michigan at the time. It's now retired, but has contributed a great deal to the early theoretical thinking in ethnobiology with this work actually demonstrating that plant families with the more species tend to be selected for more medicinal uses, that there's this positive relationship between the number of species in the plant family and the number of medicinal plant species in that family, which would tend to suggest that the availability hypothesis is well supported here, with the difference that this theory actually demonstrate that some plant family would tend to be overutilized, and these are the family that you find actually above the mean feet. I mean the mean feet line, and that the family that are below that line would tend to be underutilized, meaning that you have in those family less medicinal plant species than you would expect given the size of the family. And the overutilized family are families that have more medicinal plant species than you would expect, than you predict given the size of the family, demonstrating that some plant family tend to be overutilized. So it's not just because they do have more plant species that they are targeted, but that in those families, some some family tend to have specific plant species that have a great medicinal value, great medicinal use potential, and as a result are actually targeted. Um, Phylogenetic work confirmed this idea, showing that, using example from Nepal, New Zealand, and the Cape region in South Africa, that there are some plant clades that tend to hold more medicinal value than others, showing that the distribution of medicinal uses is not random, but actually, uh, uh, targeted to certain, clade on the phylogeny. This research has been supported by, Kowiu Yesufu's, work using similar flora in South Africa. And there have been several, example, support for these hypotheses with colleagues. We were able to test that same hypothesis using the flora of Benin, actually demonstrating that most utilized plants for medicine, most utilized medicinal plant species tend to also be clustered and showing a phylogenetic signal for a plant being overused or overutilized for medicine, showing that the overutilization of medicinal flora is just not random, that is targeting some clades. With Jacob Mutuama, who was a PhD student in my lab here at UT, we're able to test this hypothesis at a smaller scale, showing support for this hypothesis, and also showing phylogenetic signal in the way these medicinal plants are selected. We tested the same hypothesis with Daniela Robles from Florida Atlantic University, using the flora of Ecuador and showing similar result. But with an undergrad, Jason Ford, using the Hawaiian pharmacopoeia, we're able to actually demonstrate that some plant family that are globally demonstrated as being underutilized, like Poaceae and Cyperaceae, because they're expected to be alkaloid poor, and most defense of herb and grass and sedge tend to be physical defense. In Hawaiian ethnopharmacopoeia, those species or those family are actually over utilized. That grass and sedge tend to be overutilized in Hawaiian ethnopharmacopoeia, contrary to what has been found elsewhere. And this is mainly due to the specificity of Hawaiian, ethnopharmacopoeia or medicinal use, where wound healing arguably was some of the initial or most widespread use, and being able to have access to dry material that you can burn and use the ash to cover wound is one of the reasons that might motivate to the overutilization of these, these grass and sedge, but also that some of the landscape or the area that are occupied by human in the Ahupua'a are mainly dominated by these species favoring the use of these grass and sedge for medicine and several other reasons that we detail in this study. And with the added value that we're showing, a greater utilization of medicinal plants in Hawaiian ethnopharmacopoeia, more than 50% of the plants tend to be used for medicine or not. But the next postulate actually stemmed from this discussion on the non-random medicinal family plant selection, and ask if plants tend to be selected randomly, at the organ level. And the postulate actually suggests that not just, humans do not select a medicinal plant non-randomly because they target specific species or specific family, but within family and within species, the organ that are targeted by human for medicinal uses tend to be selected also in a non-random way, meaning that humans do not just select, the species because it has medicinal value and just randomly select the leaves for use or the bark for use or actually the root for use. In this, research, we demonstrate that evolutionary closed species tend to have similar organ use for medicine, showing that people tend to target the same kind of organ for similar medicinal use for plants that tend to have similar medicinal value or medicinal use. Now, why would some organ be targeted for medicinal use and other not used? Why would humans select leaves for some plant species and bark or root from other species? And one of the way of actually thinking about this question is the optimal, and is using the optimal defense theory that suggests that some plant organ would have more secondary chemistry than other, and the optimal defense theory actually predict that plant would maximize growth and defense by concentrating secondary chemistry in tissue that are more important for their long-term fitness. So if roots and a bark are important for the fitness of a given plant species, expectation is that human will tend to actually select those organs for medicinal use. Although these hypotheses or postulate is rarely tested, there have been a huge number of studies actually showing the distribution of medicinal use per organ. Some study actually showing, particularly in tropical, Africa, that roots tend to be disproportionately used for medicine and bark as well. Which coinciding with the fact that most woody species are used, might point to the fact that roots and bark are being extremely important for the persistence of species tend to actually concentrate the highest or the right concentration of secondary chemistry, and hence they're targeted for medicinal use. And I actually switched to maximize to optimize here, because in terms of medicinal plant selection, more is not always the best. So the other way of actually seeing the non-random organ selection is motivated by the 9 postulate, which is related to the doctrine of signature, hotly discussed, often dismissed idea that humans select plants organ to match their I mean, to match to match the organ that they were supposed to. I mean, they're used to treat. They're used. They're used for treatment. Basically, the idea that the efficient treatment for a given human organ would come from plants that resemble that organ, right? So plant form recapitulate its therapeutic function. That plants whose leaf look like, have a heart shape, will be more likely to be used to treat heart disease, and plants that exude, red resin or sap will be more likely to be used to treat hematological disease, wound healing, etc., etc. These has been criticized, and particularly because it has been relatively less tested, and some of the prediction could be wild. Brad Bennett, in 2007, published this paper testing the doctrine of signature, one of the rare tests of the doctrine of signature, actually showing that plant that have caudated leaf, that has heart-shaped leaf, were less likely to actually test to treat used to treat cardiovascular disease, so heart-related illnesses. But that study definitely has limitation in the fact that the way local people see heart is definitely not the Valentine's Day heart shape, and basically limiting the value of this study, because the way heart is the predictor of these in this study may have been measured incorrectly. We try to propose a different way of doing this, benefiting from the fact that when you switch from shape to color, there is an advantage of exudate or liquid in plant, being rich in secondary chemistry, and potentially having medicinal value. We tested the hypothesis that plant with red sap would be more likely to be used to treat a blood disorder or hematological illnesses, using random selection of plant across the world, and all the plant that are used to treat that have red sap in the world, and actually documented their use for about 300 plant species total, including about 30 plant species that have red sap, demonstrating that plant with red sap tend to be 2 to 4 times more likely to treat blood disorder than not. And this has nothing to do with the presence of resin or sap itself, but really somehow linked to the color of the sap that tend to be related to the presence of red quinone that are known to have medicinal value in treating wounds or for wound healing. And the last postulate, which is the 10th postulate, has been developed by Ulysses Albuquerque's group, actually proposing that human engineer their landscape, modify their landscape, filter out species, construct a perfect niche to increase the availability and the diversity of medicinal plant, with the intention of increasing the plant that are needed to treat disease, improve their livelihood, and maximize human population fitness. And this idea is motivated by two theories: the theory of niche construction, um, uh, but also the theory of optimal foraging. And Ulysses has developed this interesting paper, focusing on the role of redundancy. The fact that human might select for functionally redundant plant, therapeutically redundant plant in such a way, as an insurance policy, so that if one species goes extinct, that there's another species with the same therapeutic function that is maintained in the environment that human can actually have access to and be able to use to, for medicinal purposes to maintain themselves in the system. With one of my graduate students, Danielle Weni in Benin, we took that idea and focused more on environmental filtering or ecological, environment, an adaptation of the theory of environmental filtering, showing that local people in agroforestry system in West Africa um, tend to actually filter out some species that they maintain on their agroforestry system, weeding out some others, and ultimately creating a list of plant or maintain a list of plant uh, with the most ethnobotanical values, being medicinal or food based, showing this idea of engineering the landscape, the environment, filtering out species to maximize fitness. Now, to synthesize all of this, the first four postulate actually suggest that human use plant in a select plant randomly for medicinal use. But the fifth postulate, nuance this and suggests that it's not just random, but that some medicine-rich plant family are often targeted for medicinal use. Some of them supplemented to be able to treat diseases that are new or that native plants are not able to actually treat. And the sixth and seventh postulate, suggests that not just plant family, but plant organ are selected in a non-random way for medicinal use because they are vital for the population fitness and hence have a higher or right kind of concentration of secondary chemistry, but also possibly because they have some secret because they resemble some organ or have the color or the taste or an organoleptic characteristic or trait that projects their medicinal value or medicinal use. And the last postulate that human would tend to modify their landscape to maintain a group of plants that are valuable to maintain or maximize their population fitness. Now, for the last part of the talk, I would like to kind of think about ethnobiology in the light of previous work in other disciplines, actually thinking more broadly because all of this is not coming in the void. There have been a lot of work in paleomedicine actually showing that medicinal plant use during the Paleolithic, um, uh, even though it's difficult from my ecological method to kind of pinpoint the medicinal use of plant from archaeological evidence, it is quite clear though that amputation were practiced during that era, and periodontal disease were frequent during that era, and these are fatal disease or fatal condition that would have led to several, a huge, death rate. But the fact that people, human were able to survive amputation during that era show that some sort of treatment were used, particularly or mainly related to medicinal species. And with, initially the thinking was that the hunter-gatherer had a meat-based, diet, so known as paleo diet, but recent research showing that these hunter-gatherers were actually had a diet that was more plant-based than actually expected, could actually point to the fact that the use of food medicine was probably more prevalent even during that era than previously expected, and also the use of self-medication in non-human animal with Jane Goodall, unique early study showing the use of a plant by primate for self-medication recently, supported over the year and even recently in orangutan in Sumatra, this paper actually showing that these individual actually was using leaves from this plant that is known as rich in antibiotic and anti-inflammatory, chewing it and actually covering its wound with it, and leading ultimately to full healing of the wound after about 2 to 3 months. Showing that the use of plants, that use of plant by non-human actually suggests a deeper driver of plant use than what we can directly test in contemporary ethnobiology, or the way ethnobiology is conducted now, where we tend to actually look at what is being done today as a way of understanding what was done in the past. There is room for using element from these socio-psychology or paleo, evolutionary studies or archaeological study to further understand if or demonstrate that human medicinal plant selection has an evolutionary basis, which some people will say, oh, definitely, yeah, there's an evolutionary basis, but this is not something that is commonly discussed or demonstrated in ethnobiology. And I think it is important to kind of, to touch that aspect. And that led me to proposing a discussion around 3 questions on the evolutionary adaptive nature of human medicinal plant selection. The first question is to ask if medicinal plant knowledge tend to give multi-generational survival reproductive advantage in local community, and as a way of demonstrating that knowing and using more medicinal plant species could potentially be adaptive. And the second question is to ask if the current ethnopharmacopoeia, the list of plants that are used by local people as an adaptive list of plants which have been modified over time, filtered over time, if the filtering process, the ultimate objective was to be able to produce a collection of plants that are most able to treat most illnesses that would otherwise reduce or threaten human population fitness, or if that list of plant is just the result of ancestral plant use during the Pleistocene era when the majority of our cognitive development actually took place. And that list has been stuck, you know, over time to that Pleistocene era, and at least adapted to, you know, the need of human, a current need of human to maximize their population fitness, given that I mean, most of the time there's this hybrid system where, in addition to medicinal plant use, there is a use, I mean, a modern medical use that could supplement this traditional medicinal use strategy. I'll stop right there and actually open the discussion for a Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaoue. I realize we're at the top of the hour, so if you need to go, feel free to do that. But we'll take some questions if anyone has any, and take a few minutes to do that. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you prefer to put it in the chat, I can read those as well.
Hello, thank you for your talk. One of your postulates used the term overutilization and underutilization. And could you clarify what that is based upon? Did it mean used for so many different things, or using so much of the plant material it became limited in the environment, or what? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. Actually, the over and underutilization here is at the family scale, is the fact that some plant family have medicinal plant species than you would expect given the size of the family, with the expectation that the more species you have in a given family, the more likely that family is going to be used for medicine. But it turns out some family tend to have less or fewer medicinal plant species than you would actually expect given the size of the family, and other have way more than you would actually expect, with the expectation here being the fit line of the regression. In this case, is a negative binomial regression between the number of plants per family and the number of medicinal plant per family. Does it make sense?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions out there? I've got a quick question, Dr. Gaoue. I'm curious how do the postulates in general take into account the fact that, like, there might be some really rare plants that are not frequently used but are believed to have like more significant or stronger medicinal properties?
Yeah, so the non-random medicinal plant selection and organ selection can actually, you know, highlight the importance of those rare plants, or plants that are oftentimes out of reach, or you know, example are, you know, epiphyte or mistletoes that tend to hold high medicinal values in some region, even though they're extremely rare and hard to obtain. And in West Africa, for example, the use of mistletoe in traditional medicine is it's a specialized knowledge. Because they're rare, then it's easier to assume that their selection for medicine is not due to their sheer availability, but to their therapeutic function that somehow has been identified, tested, and maintained in the community. So, but research on that question is it's limited. There have been a number of work done. I mean, with one of my grad student Barnabas Saylor in China, showing that there's a relationship between species rarity and local knowledge and use that people have of those species using orchids in general, orchid medicine in China, actually showing that species that are rare tend to be, I mean, less known by the people, but knowledge of those rare species tend to be concentrated in specialists who know the species and tend to know their use value, I mean, their medicinal value, and tend to then focus on those species. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. So interesting.